Well, hello. It's Rick Miracle here with video number 53 of a series, Freemasonry and Satanism. This ought to be interesting. We're going to talk about UFOs and aliens. I read a book, or I should say a couple of books, by Richard Dolan. He self-published a couple books here I found on the internet. A little self-binded research on UFO sightings, like that. Descriptions. And prior to writing a major bestseller, he was writing news articles for UFO and other sci-fi magazines. And another one of his magazines, or self-published documents, is this one, Richard Dolan. And as you can see, like I normally do, I highlighted different things that I read in his material. And again, descriptions of craft, triangle shaped like that one, like this one. Complicating the matter are many witnesses who describe exceptional speed and maneuverability relating to these triangles, such as flat pivot turns or incredible acceleration. It is a tricky problem indeed. Because we did the Night Siege, that one book, 1983 and 1984 in upper New York and Connecticut. For 2 years, gigantic ships were seen by whole towns, people pulling over on the interstate. So I thought I would do something a little interesting. So I did read these two booklets. You can go online, maybe find them $5 or $10. Probably a collector's item someday. But anyways, after reading those, I had a real challenge. Is this thick book here, a little over 2 fingers, 3 fingers there. UFOs and the National Security State. A chronology of a cover-up from 1941 to 1973. So that's 51, 61, 71, 32 years of UFO sightings and alien sightings, and a chronology of a cover-up by Truman, Eisenhower, the Air Force, the CIA, and other elitists in the world to hide from you and me and the rest of us on the planet. All my tabs in there that I've read so far. And what I've read so far was I decided to read from 1945 to 1955. And what I thought I would do, and as you know how I do it, I highlighted different sentences there, you see? And I thought I would just try to read the descriptions of eyewitness reports over a 10-year period of UFO sightings. So with that said, and another well-known person wrote the foreword for this book, Jacques Vallée, Ph.D., on the bottom there. And Richard Dolan, who, I'll read a little bit here what it says about him. Rich Dolan's meticulous research takes us behind the headlines into the archives to document the interplay between the UFO subject and the national security apparatus. A must-read for serious students of the field. Another one here, that was H.E. Puloff, Ph.D. And another one says, destined to become a true classic. Like I said, from 1941 to 1973, Richard Dolan investigated the investigators and all the sightings and put them into this encyclopedia-type book. So, sighting after sighting after sighting, I read here for almost 200 pages in the last 2 weeks for me to get this done. So with that said, let me begin. Let's just see if we can come away with an impact that you can see what people saw. Those who truly care about democracy are justified in asking that the government come clean about what it knows, and most importantly, perhaps what it doesn't know, about a phenomenon of such far-reaching consequences for our science and our society. Yet modern physical therapy opens up a much wider, richer spectrum of hypothesis for objects that might blink in and out of perception, impact the consciousness of witnesses, accelerate without creating sonic booms, change shape, merge with one another dynamically, concepts of higher dimensionality, once on the fringe of physics, have entered the mainstream of science. Given what we know about the universe today, it is irrational to assume it can be described with only 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. That was in the foreword. All right. Page, I guess still more on the foreword here. In the summer of 1952, for instance, UFO sightings were so frequent and often of such high quality that some in the Air Force actually wondered whether an invasion was underway. Why did the Air Force create Project Blue Book to study the reports? Remember, I'm just reading highlighted sentences. Then came the great UFO wave of 1965 and 1966. As a result, it funded a scientific study of UFOs by the University of Colorado, known to history as the Condon Committee. In December 1969, the Air Force announced it was no longer interested in UFOs. Isn't that interesting? And we had the 1983 and 1984 night siege in New York and Connecticut, where, like I said, whole towns and interstate, everybody pulled over, and police departments and city halls would pour out of the building because somebody saw a football-sized craft hovering in the sky. Upper New York and Connecticut. Night Siege, we did that review in one of my previous videos, that book review, the book called Night Siege. Moving on. We may infer that the issue probably became a deep secret by 1946 or 1947 at the latest. All right, shortly before dawn on September 24th, 1959, police officer Robert Dickinson was driving through the streets of Redmond, Oregon, where he saw a large, bright object descend over the city, stop abruptly, and hover for at 200 feet. Its color had changed from bright white to reddish orange. Through binoculars, Dickerson and others perceived it as flat and round, tongues of flame occasionally extended from its edge. All right, moving on. During and after the Second World War, other important projects, such as the development of the biological weapons, the importation of Nazi scientists, terminal mind control experiments, nationwide interception of mail and cable transmissions of an unwitting populace. So this is after World War II. Infiltration of the media in universities, secret coups, secret wars, and assassinations all took place far removed not only from the American public, but from most members of Congress and a few presidents. Oh my. Secrecy, wealth, and independence add up to power. Secrecy, wealth, and independence add up to power. Because once they decided to keep the UFO and alien issue secret from the public and took control of the media, it became a secret national security government behind the governments. Through the years, the national security state has gained access to the world's most sophisticated technology, sealed off millions of acres of land from public access or scrutiny, acquired unlimited snooping ability within U.S. borders and beyond, conducted overt and clandestine actions against other nations, persecuted wars without serious media scrutiny. Remember, these folks back then bought up all the newspapers, enough to control what the public knows and doesn't know, and to deceive the public and mind control the public and feed the public information that is false, so the public believes something that is not real. For example, the recent election, this is what, November 2nd, 2014, and people are viciously opposed to the opposite party. The Democrats hate the Republicans. The Republicans hate the Democrats. And there's no talking of getting both people. Common people on the street are vicious about protecting Obama, or some people thinking that Obama is a horrible man. And the same thing with Bush. But what they all just can't grasp, and if you discuss it with them, some people will admit it. But both parties are puppets of the same master. The public is fooled, deceived. The issues are irrelevant. They're duping the public, fooling the public, deceiving the public. Domestically, it maintains influence over elected officials and committees, hoping for some of the billions of defense dollars. Moving on, the secrecy stems from a pervasive and fundamental element of life in our world, that those who are at the top of the heap will always take whatever steps are necessary to maintain the status quo. So with the UFO sightings and the secrecy and keeping it from the public, with the excuse that the public can't handle it, will riot in the streets if you disturb their belief in God, or whatever. That was their excuse for their actions. Okay, moving on. Even dismissing breakthroughs in propulsion technology, however, recent developments in just two areas, artificial intelligence and biotechnology, will bring revolutionary developments within the next century. artificially intelligent organisms. Is that what's coming? We know they're sky spraying us like we're bugs. We know they have HARP systems that can microwave populations and change, I guess, drive people mad into riotous situations. Bounce sound waves off the ground and cause earthquakes. And God knows what else. Heat up the atmosphere with the HARP systems, H-A-A-R-P. Then we got Monsanto Foods, which is putting herbicide and pesticide resistant elements in the DNA strand of the foods, which actually makes the food unrecognizable to the human body, which fights it as an enemy. And then, of course, the many books written about testing biological weapons, spraying the public in St. Louis and California and New York with biological flus and diseases to see what would happen. Leonard Horowitz wrote a book, AIDS and Ebola. Look that up. Anyways, moving on here. Besides, if one takes seriously the thousands of reports of UFOs and claims of alien abduction, it appears that aliens have made their presence known. Moving on. Or, if your UFO reports are to be taken seriously, there must be thousands or even millions of aliens already here. So, how serious is the UFO problem? Are aliens really among us? If so, what do they want? Keeping this discussion completely factual, we can acknowledge that the UFO phenomenon has always been global. When an object is seen visually, is tracked clearly on radar, and when pilot after pilot is adamant that what he saw was a real object, it is reasonable to conclude that we are dealing with something real. So people see it, the radar can see it, and pilot after pilot, country after country. And we're dealing with, in my discussion on this video, which is probably going to be a two-part video, 1945 to 1955, a 10-year snapshot of alien UFO craft and beings sighted by people from all over the world. It is also true that from the 1950s and beyond, people around the world have been claiming to see alien entities. In late 1954, for example, hundreds of witnesses in France and the rest of the Mediterranean region, as well as South America, claimed to see short alien beings. The witnesses were men, women, youths, elderly, doctors, professors, mechanics, homemakers, and peasant farmers. Several cases left significant landing traces. Were these people hoaxing? Not according to the authorities who investigated them. Were they delusional? If so, what caused such widespread and similar delusion? Was it a case of mass hysteria? If so, it was an event that cut across national and language barriers among people who knew little about UFOs to begin with. All right. Seems like I've highlighted almost a whole page here, so let's go. Primary sources. Books from people involved in the UFO research at the time. Many of the primary sources from the mid-1940s to the mid-1960s are hard to come by. Still, with some effort, it is possible to track down the key sources. There were three organizations of the period that collected significant UFO data. They are the Project Blue Book, formerly Project Sign, and Grudge. which were conducted by the United States Air Force. The Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, APRO, a global organization founded by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. And 3, the National Investigation Committee for the Aerial Phenomenon, NICAP, led by retired Marine Corps Major Donald Kehoe. The records of these organizations are not especially accessible. Blue Book's records are available for a fee at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. ARPO's records were never published in a systematic form and have been unavailable for years. NICAP's files ended up at the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, but have never been published. All right, so let's start the sightings. Page 2. Nova Scotia, a 5-minute sighting in which shipmates saw a huge red object rise from the ocean, pause, and fly off rapidly. In 1897, the United States experienced the first modern wave of sightings. 1897. These were the airships which first appeared in San Francisco in late 1896 and moved eastward. The New York Herald Tribune described a sighting in Chicago on April 9, 1897 that lasted from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. Thousands of amazed persons, this is the New York Herald Tribune, thousands of amazed persons declared that the lights seen in the northwest sky were those of an airship or some floating object miles above the earth. Some declared that they could distinguish 2 cigar-shaped objects and great wings. The 1897 airship sightings were the most remarkable of the pre-1940s era, but other noteworthy UFO events also took place, including one in western China in 1926 by a party of explorer Nikolai Roerich. In his book, Atelier, Himalaya, Roerich, R-O-E-R-I-C-H, described the sighting of an interesting occurrence. As he related, his party noticed a high-flying shiny object. The group brought 3 powerful field glasses and watched a huge spherical body shining in the sun, clearly visible against the blue sky and moving very fast. All right. President Roosevelt learned that such a weapon might be feasible. The best guess was that it would cost over $100 million. So that would be the nuclear bombs in the Manhattan Project. The actual cost ballooned to a mammoth $2.19 billion, over 20 times the original estimate. The money therefore had to be hidden from Congress. Roosevelt told his science advisor, Vannevar Bush, he could draw upon hidden funding. So the Manhattan Project, the nuclear bombs that were exploded in Japan, and the invention of the nuclear bomb cost $2 billion or more, and had to be hid from the public. That would be the early 1940s. The secrecy of the Manhattan Project was so remarkable that when scientists at Los Alamos Laboratory exploded an atomic device on U.S. soil in July 1945, the most decisive scientific achievement in human history, no one in the country knew a thing. So you don't think they can keep secrets. People say to me all the time, they can't be UFOs. They couldn't keep such a secret. You got to read this book. Go buy this book. They went through a great effort to keep the secret of the UFO sightings by people all over the world. They discredited people, made fun of people. Some people fell out of windows. They stole evidence for photographs. They threatened people to keep quiet or else. And it wasn't a very pleasant or else that would happen. Power scientists were actively involved not only in the Manhattan Project and other secret projects, such as Paperclip. That's where they brought all the scientists from Germany after World War II to the United States to work in secret places on secret technologies for the people who ran the USA government. I think the United States got its share of those scientists. England got its share. Russia got its share. Everybody was trying to grab those German scientists, which apparently, like we discussed in the Nikolai Tesla book, where it seems that Nikolai Tesla was getting apparitions or visions of the inventions. Apparently, Hitler and his occultic groups were into communicating with the beings on the other side, seances, mediums, and apparently these seances or these communication with interdimensional beings were giving the Germans, according to some of my research, which maybe we'll investigate in further videos of mine, but they were getting aircraft designs through the interdimensional beings. And that's a significant concept in thought as we move along here, which imported German scientists after the war, Project Paperclip. But in the UFO problem, so if these German scientists were in the occult and were designing flying saucers and other missiles and other aircraft for Hitler, and then we abducted those or brought those scientists over to the United States, and the secret people working behind the scenes in our government had privy to all that technology and knowledge, what did they learn? What did they do? What did they have? What are they doing now? Should we be concerned? Scientific names that cropped up in connection with one project were often tied to another. Names such as like Bush, the Bush family, Berkner, Bronk, Teller, Sarnoff, Page, Robertson, Goudsmit would soon intersect with the UFO problem at some key juncture, and all were involved in other projects involving extreme levels of secrecy, always in close collaboration with the military groups. I mention some of this stuff to people sometimes, and they always said that when George Bush Jr. would do a speech or have a speech, or that he always seemed to smirk or something like he knew something that the rest of us don't know. Is that how there can be consecutive Bush presidents? And even Jeb Bush, there's rumors now he wants to run for president in 2016. Getting my years mixed up. Anyways, moving on. September 1941, in the early morning hours of a clear night out in the Indian Ocean, a sailor aboard the SS Pulaski, a Polish vessel converted for the British military, saw a strange globe glowing with greenish light about half the size of a full moon as it appears to us. A not-so-tame incident occurred in Los Angeles on February 25, 1942. That night, a number of unidentified craft flew over the city and seemingly caused a blackout. It is noteworthy that for 30 years, until the release of the Marshall Memorandum, the Department of Defense claimed to have no record of the event. 5 years before Roswell, the military was already leaning to clamp down on US UFOs. The very next day after the Battle of Los Angeles, the crew of the Dutch cruiser Trump in the Timor Sea saw a large illuminated disc approaching at terrific speed. The object circled above the ship for 3 or 4 hours, then flew off at an estimated speed of 3,000 to 3,500 miles per hour. Obviously, the officer on duty could not identify the object as any known aircraft. Many similar baffling sightings occurred throughout the war. An RAF bomber over Zundee in Holland on March 1942 saw a luminous orange disc or sphere following the plane about 100 to 200 yards away. The tail gunner fired some rounds, no effect, and the object departed at 1,000 miles an hour. On August 12, 1942, a U.S. Marine sergeant in the Pacific saw a formation of about 150 objects, no wings or tails, wobbling slightly, not Japanese planes. He called it the most awe-inspiring and yet frightening spectacle I've ever seen in my life. On October 29, 1942, an Army Air Corps control tower operator named Michael of Columbus, Mississippi, saw 2 round reddish objects descend near the AAC flying school, hover, accelerate, and speed away. Such sightings continued through 1943 and 1944. In November 1944, a B-17 pilot in Australia reported being paced. Sorry about my reading today. Being paced by an amber-colored, disc-shaped object. In January 1945, a pilot with the 415th Night Fighter Squadron was followed by 3 red and white lighted objects which followed his evasive maneuvers. In France that month, an American pilot reported being paced by an object at around 360 miles per hour before it zoomed up into the sky. In March 1945, while in the Aleutian Islands, 14 sailors aboard the U.S. attack transport Dolan saw a dark sphere rise out of the ocean, follow a curved trajectory, and fly away after circling the ship. Sounds like a lot of intelligent control here. The last significant, page 6, Foo Fighters sighting occurred in the Pacific. So during World War II, they had a lot of reddish orange glowing objects. And they called them Foo Fighters, and these objects would follow the planes during World War II. And nearly brought down an American plane. On August 28, 1945, less than 3 weeks after the atomic bombing and Japanese surrender, 12 5th Air Force intelligence specialists aboard a C-46 flew toward Tokyo in advance of the occupation forces. As the plane approached Iwo at 10,000 feet, the crew saw 3 teardrop-shaped objects brilliantly white, like burning magnesium, and closing on a parallel course to the plane. The navigational needles went wild, The left engine faltered and spurted oil. The plane lost altitude, and the crew prepared to ditch. Then, in a close formation, the objects faded into a cloud bank. At that moment, the plane's engines restarted, and the crew safely flew on. One of the plane's passengers was future UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield. All right, moving on. During the 1950s, the well-connected UFO investigator Major Donald Keyhoe collected Foo Fighter reports and said that hundreds of Foo Fighters were encountered by American, British, German, and Japanese pilots. So here you are flying a plane in the war, and this glowing red or orange orb follows you or circles around in front of you or causes other acrobatic maneuvers. And they were sighted by American, British, German, and Japanese pilots. So apparently these Foo Fighters were messing with everybody. All right. In the spring of 1946, the Scandinavian countries began witnessing an impressive spectacle of luminous objects zipping through their skies night after night, and at times during the day. Sweden remained the center of action throughout, with an additional heavy activity in Finland, Norway, and Denmark. By late summer, the phenomenon had spread throughout Europe and beyond to places such as Portugal, France, Tangier, Italy, Greece, and even India. Witnesses eventually numbered in the tens of thousands. There was a serious development, and indications are that the American military watched it closely. Many sightings were of elongated, cigar-shaped objects on May 24, 1946 at 2 a.m. For example, several Swedish witnesses saw a wingless, cigar-shaped object a scant 300 feet above the ground, spurting bunches of sparks from its tail. The object moved at the speed of an ordinary airplane. On the 31st, just before noon, a wingless, huge metallic cigar was seen moving rapidly at about 1,000 feet altitude. And then we got here, they left no exhaust trail. Second, they were almost always silent. Third, many of them moved too slowly to be rockets. Fourth, they were often seen in formation, breaking formation, maneuvering, and hovering. Then we're moving on here. With the help of their catch of German scientists from Peenemünde, home of the V rockets. So the Americans and the British and the Swedes were all into this research. With the help of their catch of German scientists during Project Paperclip. So I'm only reading a little bit of this book. Go get it. He did an intensive study, as you can see here, how thick it is, of all these sightings, one after another. At some point, you get it, and you say, okay, all these people could not have been lying. That's my opinion. All right. UFO researcher Jacques Vallée pointed out that there does not seem to have been one single voice suggesting that the object seen in 1946 might have been of interplanetary origin. Sightings slowed down in September, but also spread to new places. Reliable witnesses continued to see cigar-shaped objects with flames projecting from the tail, traveling at the speed of a normal or slow airplane, and giving off little noise except for an occasional slight whistling. In France, on September 6, 2 luminous globes were seen flying in a straight line. The witnesses said the objects were not a shooting star or a plane. That same day, a photograph of one of the Swedish ghost rockets was published in the Daily Telegraph. Page 11. The Greek government was seriously alarmed by the presence of the ghost rockets over its territory, initially believing them to be Russian missiles. He claimed that the Greek army supplied him with a team of engineers to investigate the problem. The team's conclusion: the ghost rockets were neither Russian nor missiles. 1,000 ghost rocket reports, a number much smaller than the actual total of sightings. They said that 80% were some form of celestial phenomenon such as meteors. The rest had clear, unambiguous evidence that could not be explained as natural phenomenon. At least 200 of the rockets were tracked on radar, and these were definitely not the V-type missiles used by the Germans during the war. All right, approximately 100 impacts have been reported, together with the fragments of 30 of these. All have been investigated by the Defense Research Institution. It has been impossible to make certain that any of the objects originated as parts of projectiles or rockets. They have been generally been attributed to other sources. So what were they? Ghost rockets. Moving on, page 12. Still, there are connections between Nazi scientists and UFOs. Not only were the Nazi scientists involved in the cutting edge of American aviation and the propulsion technologies in the years after 1945, but many of them worked at installations that became indelibly associated with UFOs. So Hitler was into the occult. And apparently the communications with other entities that Hitler and his occult group became acquainted with or discovered, these scientists, when they came to the United States, worked on American secret UFO projects, such as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and White Sands Proving Ground. The project that brought these scientists, engineers, and spies into the United States became known as Paperclip. So, secret goings on with our government behind the people's backs. What is that old saying? Once you tell a lie, you have to continue telling lies to cover up the lie. So once these people created a secret government projects with UFO and aliens and other technologies that they've kept secret, and they don't want to seem to disclose this stuff to the public today, 2014, November 2nd. With OSS and CIA money, they recruited the bulk of Hitler's Arnwart intact. Arboir. I guess that would be a group of their scientists. For years, in fact, this organization actually reigned as the dominant intelligence service in the West Germany. Okay, moving on. Scientists, however, were the real prize. The competition was intense. Americans, Soviets, British, French, and even Argentinians scrambled for the scientists. Several were kidnapped despite everyone's denial. These German scientists, the most prominent of them being rocket genius Werner von Braun, were years ahead of the Allies scientists in a number of areas, including aircraft design and chemical, biological weapons. It seems the USA government is seriously into chemical, biological weapons. And as we are all aware these days, in 2014, October, September, and now November, Ebola is the threat. And then years ago was AIDS, which Leonard Horowitz in AIDS and Ebola, interesting enough title, says that these biological weapons were created in American laboratories. Why, I ask? All right, moving on here. What does that have to do with aliens and UFOs? I suspect it has a lot to do with aliens and UFOs. Biblically speaking, and Aleister Crowley in our previous video, communicating with Alawasi, the alien that looked like a gray alien that we looked at in my previous video. So moving on, Congress and the public knew nothing about it for decades. So they're keeping everything secret from the government. On June 10th, 1946, little side note here, try reading a book like this on a camera. It's not the easiest thing to do. Hot Vandenberg, the Army's former director of intelligence, replaced Sauer as the head of the CIG. By the year's end, he enlarged the CIG staff and won the right to collect intelligence in Latin America. Although the ever-jealous Hoover denied him the use of the FBI's agents or files. By the end of 1946, the CIG also obtained the authority to engage in psychological warfare and conduct covert operations in South America. And you get these presidents of these countries that don't do what they're told, and several of them were assassinated, as a lot of people know who research this conspiracy type material. I don't think that's going to bode well for our future, as we're already seeing in the United States with the economic chaos that's been intentionally caused and created, in my opinion, and many others. Because if you're stressed out and worried about money, you don't have time to go out and read and study books and this other material and question what the government's secret national security apparatus is doing. That's part of the plan. When you're stressed out and no money, you have no power. All right, back to the UFO issue. All right, when it was a massive operation, codenamed Shamrock, was a spying project, albeit unknown to Congress, to intercept foreign and domestic cable transmissions. It targeted companies, governments, and private citizens with or without the grounds for suspected espionage. You might wonder, what does all this have to do with UFOs and aliens? Well, apparently they had quite the spy apparatus, and they could, anybody who reported to the papers or other things about alien sightings, they did have control to go, and they did go investigate those, and they did have the control to shut people up and take the evidence. A lot of people ask, how could they keep it a secret? Just like the Manhattan Project and the 2 nuclear bombs. They're all the espionage in South America, assassination of presidents, wars after wars. Many people have been assassinated, disappeared, and threatened to keep silent. We live in a world of a national security state. On August 1, 1946, Captain Jack Puchard was flying a C-47 transport plane 30 miles from Tampa, Florida. Suddenly, he and his co-pilot saw a large object speeding toward them on a collision course. The object had a long cylinder shape, which Puchard described as twice the size of a B-29 bomber. He claimed to see a row of portholes. The object trailed a stream of fire half its length, disappeared at an incredible speed of 1,500 to 2,000 miles per hour. Planes fly like 300 to 400 or 500 miles per hour at best. So when something flies at 2,000 miles per hour, it's not of this world. Can you imagine the sheer, if it didn't have some kind of shielding on it, the sheer effect of going that fast would cause the craft to get red hot with friction and break up, I would suspect. All right, the identify, let's see. The defense establishment was secretly receiving UFO reports from its military no later than January 1947. The secret establishment. On January 16, 1947, an Army Air Force plane had a long chase over the North Sea at 22,000 feet. A classified memo wrote that the unidentified craft appeared to take efficient, controlled, evasive action. A month later, in the afternoon of February 28, 1947, an Air Force pilot, a Lieutenant Armstrong, flying 30 miles north of Lake Mead, Nevada, saw a formation of 5 to 6 white discs at an altitude of 6,000 feet. All right, moving on. So like I said, we're doing 1945 to 1955. This video I'll try to get up to 1950. Residents of Spokane, Washington reported 8 disc-shaped objects about the size of a house, said to be flying at around 600 miles per hour. The objects then fell with a dead leaf motion, I guess like a leaf like this, landing on the shore of the St. Joe River in Idaho before 10 witnesses. On the 23rd in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a railroad engineer saw 10 shiny, fluttering disc-shaped objects in a line high in the sky. The same day, pilot Richard Rankin saw a formation of 10 objects in Bakersfield, California, flying north. They too seemed to be disc-like with a diameter of about 100 feet, about as long as a house, flying in formation at a great speed, anywhere from 300 to 600 miles per hour. Dick Rankin was a respected pilot with over 7,000 hours of flight time experience. Okay, these sightings, all by civilians, eventually gained some publicity, but the series of sightings which began that month at the Oak Ridge nuclear facility in Tennessee remained unknown to the public for years. Oak Ridge was the atomic testing facility for the Atomic Energy Commission, housing some of the world's most sophisticated technology. In 1947, nuclear technology was on the cutting edge, and the U.S. government severely restricted access to it. Violating the airspace of the Oak Ridge was a serious matter, and yet something, according to a declassified FBI document, without authorization, flew over Oak Ridge that June. The object was photographed by a civilian employee, a resident engineer with the Air Materials Command. UFO sightings over Oak Ridge continued with great frequency during the late 1940s and beyond. A number of them were radar and visual cases, although the radar and visuals were reported from different locations. It's hard to dismiss all this. Let's see here, we got on that day, pilot and businessman Kenneth Arnold from Boise, Idaho, was flying near Mount Rainier, Washington, in search of a downed C-46. He saw a tremendously bright flash and noticed a formation of 9 bright, extremely fast objects moving along in a column. He was startled because he saw no tail on the objects. At first, he thought they must be experimental jets and that the Air Force was using camouflage to hide the tails. He said that they flew in a definite formation, but backward, when the first craft elevated more than the others. Was like speedboats on rough water, or like a saucer would be if you skipped it across the water. He estimated their size to be about 100 feet in diameter. Arnold was struck by how fast the objects seemed to be moving, so he decided to measure their speed as they passed between Rainier's Peak and another peak he knew to be about 50 miles away. They covered this distance in 1 minute and 42 seconds, a speed of 1,700 miles per hour. Moving on, we got Pacific Northwest. Within the hour of the Arnold sighting, an Oregon prospector named Fred Johnston saw 5 or 6 round metallic disc-looking craft through a telescope. So he saw 5 or 6 round metallic-looking discs through a telescope over the Cascade Mountains. As they circled overhead, they disrupted his compass needle. Johnson insisted that he had not heard of the Arnold report. A day after Arnold's sighting, people in Kansas City, Oklahoma City, and Pueblo, Colorado reported sightings of flying discs. All of these involved several objects flying in loose formations. Sightings were also being made in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. On June 27th, Air Force Public Relations Officer Captain Tom Brown stated the Army had no idea what they are. In mid-afternoon on the 28th, an Army Air Force pilot in a F-51 flying near Lake Mead, Nevada, saw a formation of 5 or 6 circular objects off to his right. That same day, 4 Air Force officers, 2 pilots, and 2 intelligence officers near Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, saw a bright light traveling across the sky. It zigzagged with bursts of high speed. We noticed a glare in the sky. We looked up and saw a silvery disc whirling along. We watched the thing for nearly 60 seconds, then it simply disappeared. It didn't go behind the mountain range. At one time it was clearly visible, and then it just wasn't there. The next day, a Navy officer flying near the Grand Canyon at 30,000 feet saw 2 gray circular objects diving at unconventional speed. The objects looked about 10 feet in diameter and seemed to land about 25 miles south of the canyon. A mere week after the Arnold sightings, flying saucers seemed to be engulfing America. The Pacific Northwest had the heaviest concentration of activity. Newspaper coverage of the flying saucers was intense. An interesting sightings occurred in July. On the 1st of the month, an Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce official saw a disc-like bluish object following a zigzag path in the northwestern sky over New Mexico. Another report from New Mexico came from the Navajo Reservation in the northwestern part of the state. Flying saucer reports came from the east too. Meteorologist E.E. Uger, who ran the U.S. Weather Bureau in Louisville, Kentucky, believed he saw one. In eastern Canada, 4 people on Prince Edward Island saw objects traveling at great speed in the sky. One witness described them as shapeless but glistening in the sunlight. On July 3rd, an astronomer at South Brookville, Maine, saw a UFO about 100 feet in diameter. Air Material Command publicly explained it as birds or insects, although the Air Force Project's Grudge later listed the sighting as an unusually well-supported incident with no explanation. That evening in Denver, several people reported seeing projectiles variously described as too fast for an airplane and not fast enough for a falling star, not moving at all or traveling at great speed. Activity increased yet more on Friday, July 4th. One sighting that occurred near Boise, Idaho, received a great deal of attention since the objects were witnessed by Captain Edward Smith and his co-pilot Ralph Stevens of United Airlines. Smith was a highly regarded pilot with much experience in the air while en route to Portland. Smith and Stevens saw 9 disc-like objects. Smith's status prompted an FBI investigation into the sighting, which credited him as reliable. In Portland, many people, including police officers, saw a large number of UFOs in the middle of the afternoon in formation and alone. In Redmond, Oregon, a car full of people saw 4 disc-shaped UFOs streak past Mount Jefferson. In Seattle, a Coast Guard yeoman took the first publicly known photograph of a UFO, a circular object moving against the wind. The photo showed a round dot of light. Moving on here, page 20. The Air Force during this time established a project to investigate and analyze the UFO reports. He described their attitude as a state of near panic. Donald Keyhoe later obtained military sources who told him that the Air Force at this time ordered its pilots to down a UFO for examination by shooting or by running and bailing out. So they were even instructed to ram their jet into a UFO and bail out. Sounds pretty serious. Within this context, let us move on to the most controversial event in the entire history of the UFO phenomenon, the crash at Roswell, New Mexico. Well, speaking of the Roswell incident, I read a couple books a few years ago. As you know, I collect books and read them. Witness to Roswell. And it's a pretty good story. Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt on the top there. What happened, to sum it up in this particular book and story, was in 1947, Mac Brazel discovered a crash debris with apparently alien small entities, people, whatever, dead in a field in New Mexico, Roswell. So I thought I'd just read a little bit from this if you want to get the book, but I'll give you the gist of it from my synopsis. Alright, page 55. From the very beginning of the Roswell investigation by civilian researchers, more than 2 decades ago, and until quite recently, the role played in the Roswell incident by the sheep rancher who started it all, Mac Brazel, had pretty much remained unchanged. As will be covered in detail later in this book, sometime during the first week of July 1947, in the course of his duties as the foreman of the J.B. Foster Ranch, located 32 miles southeast of Corona, he discovered a pasture full of pieces of strange, silvery wreckage. The morning after a severe thunder and lightning storm, during which he thought he had heard an explosion. After consulting with neighbors and relatives about his find and being told about a possible $3,000 reward offered by a newspaper for pieces of a flying saucer, he took their advice and drove the 75 miles in his ancient pickup to Roswell. Upon his arrival at Roswell, Brazel reported his find to the sheriff's office, but could not seem to get Sheriff George Wilcox interested enough to do anything about it. Brazel even showed him some samples of the wreckage he had brought with him, but to no avail. Fortunately for Wilcox, whose eyes had glazed over, he then received a phone call from a young announcer from Roswell radio station KGFL named Frank Joyce. There's a picture of Frank Joyce here. Who was looking for any local tidbits of news that he might put on the air. Not a minute too soon for the thankful Wilcox, as he passed Brazel off to Joyce with, well, there's somebody here right now with a story you might be interested in. So Wilcox handed Brazel the phone. After some back and forth between the two, Joyce suggested to Brazel that he should contact the air base in town, and hung up. A little bit more here. So, Brazel on the phone now. Who's going to clean all that stuff up? That's what I want to know. I need someone to come out here and clean it up. Joyce, what stuff? What are you talking about? Brazel, don't know. Don't know what it is. Maybe it is from one of them flying saucer things. Joyce, oh really? Then you should call the airbase. They're responsible for everything that flies in the air. They should be able to help you or tell you what it is. It's page 58. Brazel. So Brazel started getting angry. Oh God, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's horrible, horrible, just horrible. That's what he's saying on the phone to Joyce. What's that? What's horrible? What are you talking about? Brazel, the stench, just awful. Joyce, stench, from what? What are you talking about? Brazel, they're dead. Joyce, who? Who's dead? Brazel, little people. Unfortunate little creatures. At this point, Joyce thought to himself, this is crazy. He decided to play the role of devil's advocate to the story he did not believe. What the? Where? Where did you find them? Brazel, someplace else. Joyce, well, you know, the military is always firing rockets and experimenting with monkeys and things, so maybe. Brazel, shouting, gosh darn it, they're not monkeys, and they're not human. With that, Brazel angrily slammed down the phone to end the conversation. So in this book, which I read it all a few years ago, it describes finally the military getting involved. Here's a drawing. Looks like the gray aliens. A 1978 composite drawing by Leonard Stringfield of a Roswell alien. So anyways, the short story of it is the military went out there, fenced off the area, combed it, the troops all lined up in a row, walking across the pasture, picking up every tidbit of debris they could find, loading it up into planes, flying it out of the area, and some of the obnoxious behavior by the sheriff's department and the military, threatening even children to keep their mouth shut. Some people seemingly got paid off big bucks to keep their mouth shut. So it was a fascinating book, and as you know, I read a lot of books, and it's the summation of the books you read that give you a somewhat of a snapshot or a picture of what's going on in the world. Another one I read was this book a few years ago, The Day After Roswell, and by Colonel Philip Corso, you see on the bottom. And to give you some idea of the intrigue we were dealing with the governmental powers, I'll read a little bit about Colonel Corso, Philip Corso's book here, and tell you what he was involved in and what he wrote about. But the official camouflage was sagging under the weight of the information the group had to investigate, and the pressure of time they were allotted. Soon the military representatives found, just as they did in Korea, that they really couldn't trust the career intelligence people, especially the CIA, because there seemed to have a different agenda. I think you're one about 2014, the depopulation efforts, HARP, H-A-A-R-P, sky spraying God knows what in the skies, the Middle East, mayhem and murder going on. You wonder what kind of agenda they have. Sorry about that. My day job phone rang. Anyways, as I was saying, the agendas, the people behind the scenes, the people who really run things, what we people see is just on the surface. So anyways, back to this book. Corso says, maybe the military became resistant to giving up all the information it was collecting independently of the central group. Maybe in the absence of any actual legislation establishing how the group's work was to be paid for, the military saw valuable and fundable weapons opportunities slip through its fingers to the CIA's budget. Maybe, and I know this is what happened. A power struggle developed within the group itself. So they had people researching the UFO issue and other issues at that time. The whole structure of the working group had changed since the late 1940s when it was formed. What started out as a close-knit group of old friends from prep school had become an unmanageable mess within 5 years. Many pieces of the pie were floating around, and the different military branches wanted to break off chunks of the black budget so that you needed an entire administration just to manage the managers of the cover-up. Would that be the Roswell cover-up? Therefore, at some point near the middle of the Eisenhower administration, seams opened up in the grand camouflage scheme where nobody knew what anybody else was doing. Because of the cover-up, nobody really had a need to know, so nobody knew anything. The only people who wanted to get their hands on information and hardware belonged to the CIA, but nobody, even those who vaguely understood what had happened, 14 years earlier, the Roswell crash of the UFO craft, and the aliens, maybe one was alive when they found him, trusted the CIA. Officially then, nobody knew nothing and nothing happened. Through the 1950s, a cascade effect developed. What had started as a single-purpose camouflage operation was breaking up into smaller units. Command and control functions started to weaken, and just like a submarine that breaks up at the bottom of the ocean, debris in the form of information bubbled to the surface. Army CIC, once a powerful force, to keep the Roswell story itself suppressed, had weakened under the combined encroachments of the CIA and the FBI. It was during this period that my old friend J. Edgar Hoover, Colonel Philip Corso, never happy about being kept out of any loop, jumped into the circle and very quietly began investigating the Roswell incident. This shook things up, and very soon afterwards, other government agencies the ones with official reporting responsibility, began poking around as well. So anyways, the short story of it in this book, and I read this years ago. I don't have a lot of tabs because back then I wasn't tabbing, highlighting. But bottom line is, Philip was approached by a general of the army, and he was fed tidbits of the technology of the crashed aircraft and was assigned to give it to major USA corporations to re-engineer that technology. I'll read a little bit about the inside cover here. With unprecedented detail, Corso divulges how he spearheaded the Army's reverse engineering project that seeded alien technology at American companies such as IBM, Hughes Aircraft, Bell Labs, and Dow Corning without their knowledge. He describes the devices found aboard the Roswell craft and how they were precursors to today's integrated circuit board chips, fiber optics, lasers, super tenacity fibers. He also discusses the role alien technology played in shaping geopolitics, policy, and events, and how it helped the United States surpass the Russians in space, spurred elaborate Army initiatives such as SDI, Horizon, and HAARP, H-A-A-R-P, those transmitters all over the world that they can beam energy anywhere. I suppose they could wipe out a whole city with a beam and change the weather and cause earthquakes. And ultimately brought about the end of the Cold War, laying bare some of the government's most closely guarded secrets the day after Roswell, not only forces us to reconsider the past, but also our role in the universe. So, fitting in with Richard Dolan's book, then we're approaching the Roswell conversation. I thought I would just talk about those two books I read a long time ago, about how they were, like I said, they threatened all the city folks and children and in Roswell, and they confiscated all the evidence, and then they reverse engineered all the technology. So anyways, let's read a little bit more from this book, and I'll do a little synopsis on some other books and end this video. And I plan on having a part 2 of this book. There's that many more alien, UFO descriptions by all kinds of people all over the world that we ought to reinforce our minds with so we can make a decision. Anyways, here we go. I highlighted, as you know, just only certain stuff to give us the gist of the story. Colonel William Blanchard, the commanding officer of the 509th Bomb Group, ordered Air Intelligence Officer Captain, later Major Jesse Marcel, to investigate the Roswell incident. Marcel, accompanied by the Army CIC Captain Sheridan Cavert and Cavert's subordinate, Master Sergeant Lewis Ricker, visited Wilcox's office. That would be Sheriff Wilcox we just talked about. And spoke with Brazel, the farmer who discovered the debris. It's in this book. Now these people, Mr. Richard Dolan, let's talk about him for a second, so you can reinforce your opinion about this material. Richard M. Dolan is a gifted historian whose study of U.S. Cold War strategy led him to a broader context of increased security measures and secrecy during World War II. One of the aspects of such government policies that has continued to hold the public's imagination for more than half a century is the question of identified flying objects. UFOs in a national security state. That would be the people running things that are keeping everything a secret from the people. They know things that nobody knows, and they don't want the citizens to know what they know because knowledge is power for them. All right, back to the Roswell incident, page 22, Richard Dolan's book. Marcel also found foil, Major Marcel, that when crumpled would unfold itself without any sign, a wrinkle, and I-beams with odd symbols on them. Well, speaking of odd symbols, I thought I would remind ourselves, you and me, of the previous videos, the gold of the gods, and the gold plates and the odd symbols. This would be down in Ecuador. We did this book review, the huge caverns in the top of the Andes that had corridors all the way down from the top, those high mountains, down to the ocean floor with storage room, and apparently was the safe haven, according to the Chronicles of Ankakor, that the South Americans said that aliens came in aircraft. There's some symbols there. And helped them go underground into cities that they had built to survive the Earth catastrophe 12,000 years ago and 6,000 years ago. And so they say is supposed to happen again now. Sometime thereabouts 2012, 13, or 14 or 15, I don't know. And then, of course, we remember the Hudson Night Siege, 1983 to 1984. Aircraft the size of football fields hovering over Connecticut and New York. And then the Montauk Project that went on Montauk, New York. I'll read the back of the book because I think it's important. It's part of the CIA, FBI, and other secret organizations' mind-controlled experiments with even in anti-gravity and other beyond people's imagination of interdimensional communications and even time travel, they're saying. So I'll just read this. We did this book review earlier. Remember in Kate Perry's Grammy Awards, there was a big horse that looked something like that. And at the Denver International Airport, where they have the huge underground city, they say, where Obama went when Comet Elenin came through, they have that big horse on in the same kind of stance as that in front of the airport, which is kind of freaks everybody out. It's kind of odd, glowing blue eyes or whatever. Look it up on the internet. But anyways, just a short synopsis, seeing we're talking about aliens and secret scientists and CIA and FBI and Air Force projects going on. The Montauk Project chronicles the most amazing secretive research project in recorded history, starting with the Philadelphia experiment in 1943, invisibility experiments which were conducted aboard the U.S. Eldridge that resulted in a full-scale teleportation of the ship and crew. 40 years of massive research ensued, culminating in bizarre experiments at Montauk Point, New York, that actually tapped the powers of creation and manipulated time itself. The Montauk Project bridges modalities of science with the most esoteric, occultic, witchcraft, I'm adding these words, magic, techniques ever imagined, and finally catapults us to the threshold of the stars. We all know something is out there, but we're not sure exactly what. This book, at long last, begins to provide some solid clues. I read this, see all my tabs there? I think we went over a lot of this in a previous video. Then we did this book, Psychic Self-Defense. And again, I'm just going to be brief here before I get back to my Richard Dolan's UFO study, because I think it's relevant. Some of these UFOs would pop into existence and pop out of existence, would be glowing orbs and turn into the other shapes. So psychic self-defense says if you do astral travel, your soul leaves your body. There are a lot of spooky creatures out there in the astral world that none of us can see, where the ghosts reside, and demons and cast out angels or whatever there may be, Luciferian, satanic rituals, that even like the Bohemian Grove in California. Would our presidents go there, dress in long robes, bring in gay men, they don't allow women, have a satanic ritual where they throw a baby into a burning fire and chant and scream and holler. But anyways, Dion talks about in this book that when you do astral travel or remote viewing, you have to understand what you're dealing with to protect yourself from the entities that are there. Anyways, to bring us into some more bizarre reality, of course, there's Tim Rifat in the government programs of remote viewing. That was part of the programs that were going on at Mod Talk Point. And then we reviewed the book Psychic Warrior with David Morehouse, who left the government program and told all to the public again. Inside the CIA Stargate program. And another one that probably is worth mentioning, published in, let's see here, 1996. This is 2014. And we all know Ebola is in the news. And Leonard Horowitz goes through great lengths at exposing the labs of American corporations and the government at supposedly creating AIDS and Ebola. See, it says Ebola on there. So in 96 they have Ebola, and apparently in 2014 they're using it as a tool to freak out the public and maybe cause some kind of fast-forward movement into the New World Order. So getting back to the book, Marcel also found foil that when crumpled would unfold itself without any sign of a wrinkle, and I-beams with odd symbols on it. That's why I got out the Anchor and the Gold of the Gods material to remind us what we already know. On them, and a pink lavender coronation. The beams flexed slightly but would not break. Marcel concluded that the debris was definitely not a weather or tracking device, nor was it any sort of plane or missile. It was something I had never seen before or since. It certainly wasn't anything built by us. Marcel and Cabot arrived at the RAAF that morning on Tuesday, July 8th, with 2 carloads of debris. Meanwhile, Marcel arrived with the debris at Ramsey's office. What happened next is disputed. According to Marcel, the 2 left the office and then came back. Marcel swore that at this time the debris was different, that it had been changed. In its place was a ripped-apart weather balloon scattered on the floor. So they were pulling a fast one on the public. So it says here, his research became the basis of a 1980 book, The Roswell Incident, co-written by so we have the 2 books I have that I have not read. When I do read these, I'll do the book reviews. Witnessed the true story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO abductions and UFO crash at Roswell by Saylor, Ziegler, and Moore. So I have plenty of these books. So anyways, it says here, the Roswell incident. I don't think I have that book. Yeah, right there I did. That's crash at Roswell. Sorry about that. 3 years later, the key members of that team, Kevin Randall, Don Schmidt, published their conclusions in the book UFO Crash at Roswell. That's this book. Mentioned in this book. Not only had the military recovered a UFO at Roswell, they asserted they also retrieved alien bodies. In 1992, Friedman and Dr. Berliner co-authored Crash at Corona, which argued that the government recovered not one but 2 saucers in 1947, along with 7 dead extraterrestrials, one that was still alive. So I'm just trying to end this video on finalizing the Roswell discussion in this book. Bill Brazel was the son of Mac Brazel. His father had died, the one who discovered the material, but Bill offered his own accounts of the events. He claimed to have found various types, this is Braswell's son, of debris, including something similar to balsa wood, except that it would not whittle or break. Another type of debris looked like heavy gauge fishing line. This too would not break. The last type of material was similar to tinfoil or lead foil, except that the foil would unfold and straighten out after being crumpled up. And then another one here. Glenn Dennis was the mortician at Roswell in 1947. He received several phone calls from the Roswell AAF mortuary office. So the Air Force mortuary office called this mortician. The officer wanted to know about chemical solutions and hermetically sealed caskets, including how small they came. Remember, the aliens were small, 3 and 4 feet tall. According to Dennis, the nurse warned him that he should not be there, and he was going to get himself killed. So apparently this mortician went to the Air Force Base to investigate, and he was warned he should not be there. The nurse again the following day, who told him there had been 3 little bodies, 2 were badly mangled, and 1 was in fairly good condition. Later, Dennis said he heard the nurse had been killed in a plane crash. Just another example of these witnesses, that all this material that I study. The witnesses, the people involved, seem to die. Somebody made a comment, emailed me the other day and said, "Rick, your videos are insightful." Well, it says right here, the nurse was involved and was warning people and then died in a plane crash. It's like all the witnesses for 911. How come they're all dead? How odd is that? Dozen people who were eyewitnesses to things are dead, but you and I are still alive. Selective death, I guess. Anyways, military police told the Wilcox couple that the entire family would be killed if they ever talked about it. Inez said George Wilcox had gone out to the site, saw a big burned area, debris, and 4 space beings with large heads and suits like silk. One of the beings was alive. In 1993, New Mexico Representative Stephen Schiff, under pressure from his constituency, requested information from the Pentagon about the Roswell crash. As a result, he asked the General Accounting Office, Congress's investigative arm, to prepare a report on the status of the government records relating to Roswell. This was in July 1995. The GAO reported that, incredibly, all administrative records on Roswell Army Air Force Base from March to 1945 through December 1949 were inexplicably destroyed, as were all outgoing messages from October 1946 through December 1949. So there you have it. And one more thing, I guess I'll finish this off. Remember in The Gold of the Gods, Van Daniken's books, we remember that. So I would like to remind us all that in those caves in Ecuador, Van Daniken did a video on YouTube. You can see the name of this video for this particular snapshot. But there is the pyramid with the cap and eye. And then another one of his pieces of stone. On the bottom it has the Palladian star system and some more of those strange characters they find on the crashed mysterious symbols that seem to be everywhere on all these ancient monuments, even in Egypt and down there in Ecuador and Peru. And so there you go. Now you tell me that that pyramid and that eye doesn't look like this pyramid and this eye on the dollar bill. What's up? Seriously, what's up? Remember, this series is Freemasonry and Satanism. And obviously the Freemasons and the Illuminati control the banks, the Rothschilds, Rockefellers. And all the presidents were Masons, and they designed the dollar bill with that symbol, which is on all the alien symbols. So, I don't know if you get goosebumps thinking about this, but what's up? So watch for video number 2 regarding a continued reading from this book on more snapshots of the descriptions, people's descriptions of what they saw. Pilots, citizens, all kinds of people. Thank you for watching my video. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what's going on in our reality. And I think that reading a diverse amount of different books, subjects, diverse subjects, authors, bestsellers, these people are smarter than me. But if we look at everything combined, maybe we can have an opinion of what is going on in our world. And I think an informed populace, an informed people, are probably in a better position to direct their own destiny than one where everybody is fooled, deceived by the TV and the radio and the news and the movies. What kind of world is it where nobody really knows what reality is? Thank you again, and may God help us all. That's what I pray.